many years ago, when you were known by the names Fred or Freddie. And then there was a time when you were principal of the high school, when all of us of my generation knew you only as Mr. Weaver. And now I have the honor once again to address you as Fred. What is your full name, Fred?
Frederick L. Weaver.
And I think you've told me in the past that the L is just an initial that doesn't represent a name or anything.
That's correct.
Okay. You live in Brentwood, and you live here with your lovely wife, Ruth, and have lived here for quite a while. When did you move to Brentwood? When did you come to Brentwood?
1955.
All right, so you were here during the real growth years of Brentwood, of this district.
Yes, when I came here, we had only grades 9. The rest of the students all went to Bayshore High School.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk in some detail about those years, but first, let me take you back to your family situation. You have a child who is now... You have two children who are now grown adults.
Right.
Would you tell us their names and tell us about them, okay?
Our son's name is Philip, and he has been teaching over in the Sachem High School for a number of years, teaches math. And our daughter is a social psychiatric worker in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Uh-huh. And you mentioned grandchildren the last time I spoke with you.
We have just the one.
Okay, and that's your son's child, is it?
Yes.
Do you get much of an opportunity to spend time together, do you?
Well, some. As she's getting older now, she has other interests, and we don't see her as much.
Okay, what's her name, Fred? The grandchild. And let me ask you, before you even answer that, is there a personality that you see in her that you recognize as definitely being in your family, that there is a certain quality or identity that she's expressed so far that says, yes, that's family, that's a Weaver?
Yes and no.
Okay. All right. You want to explain that a little bit to me?
Well, she certainly has some of the characteristics of my son.
Okay. Uh-huh.
But she's an individual on herself.
Thank goodness for that. Mm-hmm. Good. Well, you don't get a chance then, I gather, to see your daughter that often if she's out.
No, she gets home. She always comes home for Christmas, and usually sometime during the summer.
Mm-hmm. Where were you born?
Deposit, New York.
In Deposit?
Right.
And where's that? I'm not familiar with that part.
That's upstate in the Binghamton area.
I see. I see. Can I cross the line here and ask you when you were born?
1909.
Okay. And here's one for you, Fred. What's the earliest childhood memory that you can grab hold of just now?
I don't really have any particular one.
Not one particular
No.
earliest memory, but are there some early memories that you can share with us?
Well, I did a lot of fishing, a lot of hiking.
Even as a child?
Yes.
Uh-huh. And who went with you when you went hiking? Or
I went alone.
I see. Well, those were the times, I guess, when life in a community was very different and you could do that. Today, parents might be afraid to let their
that's true.
little ones go off. What was your mother's maiden name?
Olive Williams.
Mm-hmm. Are you somewhat aware of her family history and background?
Oh, yes.
And what would that be?
Well, she came from a large family, but...
That's an old historical name, of course, Williams.
Yes. She had several sisters.
And she was born in this country, Fred?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Were her folks also born in the United States?
Yes.
Oh, so your maternal family goes back several generations. Do you know when how far back it was that the
No.
first people arrived? Uh-huh. Okay. What about your father? Your father's family history or origin?
Well, he was also in this country,
Mm-hmm.
and he was indirectly in the Civil War.
How so?
Well, I'm not sure exactly. He
Mhm.
didn't actually do any of the fighting, but he was in the war,
I'll be
the
done.
Civil War.
So he must have been a very young man then.
Yes. That was before I was born, though.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I would hope so, yes. We know that you're a legend, but you're not quite that much of a legend. At that time, was his family would they have been living in the north, or were they at that point in the south?
I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have any childhood memories of your mother as growing up?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What did she enjoy doing? And as I say that, I recognize that women of her generation had a particular role in the family that in some cases differs greatly from what she would be doing today. More than likely were she to be raising you today. But you saw her when she was happy, when she was involved. And so I asked what she might have been doing that made her happy.
Well, she stayed pretty much in the home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what about your father and his background?
Well, my father ran a clothing store
Oh,
for a good many years.
a retail clothing?
Yes, retail clothing, and in deposit.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the Depression came along, the store went bankrupt.
Uh-huh. And I suspect he took a very hard financial hit
Yes,
at that time.
Lost a lot of money.
Did he have people working for him?
Yes.
He did. And so it affected not just him and his family, your family, but also the families of the employees. Do you have some early memories of your dad?
Yes.
Can you share some of those?
Well, we fished together
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
when he had the time,
Yes.
and I helped out in the store when I had the time.
Yes. This was when you were probably about a teenager, or
Yes.
you going to school at the same time and working part-time with your dad. Was yours a large family, Fred?
No.
Were you an only child? Or?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that being an only child is something that affects a person's outlook or expectations differently than if you
Well, may.
Because you certainly had met your share of only children when you were in education. I've been in education for so many years. You have met a lot of youngsters that then had that kind of experience that you had. You've pretty much described your family life growing up as one in which you had a good deal of independence.
Yes.
You sound like a guy who learned to be on his own, to do the things that you like to do, which you have said were hiking and fishing, and then helping in the store.
I also played sports in high school.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
And what sports would those have been?
Basketball, particularly.
Uh-huh.
But I also ran track.
Uh-huh.
And I did the same in college. I played basketball in college and ran track, ran the 100. Because they had the 100 and the 220 then. Now they're in meters instead of feet.
Okay.
Yards.
Do you, has that nourished an interest in sports ever since? Are you,
oh, yes.
What do you follow today in the way of sports?
Mostly basketball and football.
As we talk, there has been a great deal of excitement on the part of Americans of French and Brazilian heritage because of the recent soccer match that has certainly captured headlines.
I never played soccer. We didn't have soccer in those days.
That's right. Yeah. Were there
But I did play basketball and ran track, and I ran the 100-yard dash in college in just under 10 seconds.
All right. So you also were a record setter then.
Yes.
At the time. Were there adult influences other than your mother and your father that you look back and say that these people had a profound effect
upon
upon
the
me?
Principal of my high school.
Really? Do you remember his name?
Oh, yeah, Arthur Radley.
You sound as if you maintained a contact with him for some time afterward. Isn't that wonderful?
Quite a number. In fact, up until he died, we were.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. How come you decided to go into education? Was he the major reason for?
I'm not sure that he was a major one, but he was a factor that I went in. Mainly, I think I went in because I enjoyed sports. And
it was a way to stay involved in sports and passing it on and teaching. At what point did you know that education was the direction your life was going to take?
My senior year in college, in high school.
And once you had made that seminal decision, what did you do about it? Once you decided, this is for me, now what?
Well, one of the teachers in the high school was from Middlebury, and she encouraged me to go there. And I went there on an athletic scholarship.
I see, okay. You mentioned this teacher. Do you remember some of the teachers that you had along the way in elementary and high school?
Oh, yes, I remember all of them.
Do you really?
Yes.
Can you just name a couple?
Well, Esther Brown was the one that influenced me to go to Middlebury. She was a language teacher in the high school. And then Harriet Radiker was another one that influenced me. And she taught Latin. I took 4 years of Latin.
Yes.
And the Latin, regardless of what anybody says, does help you with English.
Yes. Sure, to know roots and derivation and so on, absolutely. And we've seen the curriculum change considerably, haven't we? We've both watched that happen over the years. Of the teachers that you remember for all the right reasons, are there people who you remember for the wrong reasons?
No, not really.
Great. That's wonderful. I'm so thrilled to be here with you. I can't tell you. You are such a gentle man, and I mean that in the most complimentary sense, as in gentleman. That to be sharing your personal history with me in this way and with all of us is indeed a privilege. Do you remember any of your childhood or high school friends? The guys you hung out with, that you played with or ran with? Or?
Yes, one of the fellows that I went around with a great deal was William Beal. And of course, once we left high school, I didn't see too much of those people anymore, but I ran into him up in Palmyra. I was at the time teaching in Phelps, and he was at a basketball game that I was refereeing.
Oh, yes, you did that for a lot of years. We'll talk about that,
Yeah.
too. Fred, can you remember the room where you slept as a child?
Yes.
Could you describe it?
Well, it was a large room, had a large closet, double bed, and that's about it.
Okay. And where would the house have been? That was where you grew up then, obviously.
Yes.
Was it on a street, or was it a rural?
It was on the street,
It was,
29 Court Street, Deposit.
Okay. Were there family chores at that time that you had to do? Were there things that you were responsible for, since you were pretty much your own person during those years? Your father was working, your mother was at home, of course.
Well, of course, I took care of the lawn,
Mm-hmm.
and we had a terrace that surrounded the whole house. It was a large, we had a very large lot, and the terrace had to be trimmed. I never enjoyed that.
Okay. I can relate to that, but I want to ask you this: did you enjoy doing that, or was that a kind of a burden to you?
Quite a burden.
It was. Okay. Do you remember a particular family holiday that you enjoyed?
Yes, we used to, in the summertime, we would go to Columbia Lake, which was a lake about 4 miles from Deposit. And we would stay up there part of the summer. And of course, did a lot of fishing there.
Was that a regular summer routine?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Was that a bungalow, or was it a like camping type?
Well, we rent a cottage.
You rented a cottage.
Yeah.
Okay.
We weren't there the whole summer.
I
We
see.
were there anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks.
Uh-huh. But that was a special time.
Yes.
What were your typical interests at that time? You've mentioned the sports, but
Primarily, that
it
was it.
primarily,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So on an average summer day, let's say, if you were not up at the lake, you would have been taking care of the grounds around the house, but you would also have been
Playing tennis.
Okay. Play tennis as well. Would you today describe yourself as an early riser or a late night person?
I don't get up too early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Not anymore.
There was a great many years where you had no choice but to get up and do that. I can well understand how this is a break. Fred, growing up, do you remember a favorite toy that you had, or not? I mean, that will go back now to your really early years.
Not really.
Okay. I can see you with a tennis racket in your hand, or I can see you with sports paraphernalia, perhaps. Aromas, they say, have a great value in helping us remember things. Are there any aromas that do that for you, that when you smell a particular scent or
No, I don't
pick
think
up
so.
something, takes you back in time to a place or a time? Okay. Now, the first full-time school that you attended would have been what?
Deposit High School.
Deposit High School.
Well, Deposit. The high school and the grades were all in the
All
same
together.
building. Yeah. Deposit's a small community, about 2,000 population.
So it was K through 12 in the same
Right.
building.
The same building.
Did you graduate from that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I didn't ask you a question. It slipped my mind. I want to get back to it for a moment because I assume that you've answered it, and that is, I was going to ask you about your first paying job, the first job that you had for which you received money. Would that have been in your father's store, or would that have been somewhere else?
No, that was, I worked in Hancock in the garage for a time. I was not a mechanic. I pumped gas and took care of the parts department and so forth.
I wonder, what kind of gas did they sell there? Do you remember what it was?
No, I don't.
The reason I'm asking is it occurs that there are a lot of petroleum companies that are no longer around, and I wondered if you might have had that etched in there.
I don't remember.
Okay. First day of school. Do you remember anything about it? Okay. When you left high school and you went on to college, did you do both your graduate and undergraduate work at the same college, or did you go somewhere else?
No, I did my undergraduate work at Middlebury, and then my graduate work was at St. Lawrence.
At St. Lawrence?
St. Lawrence University.
Now, would that have been, it sounds to me, I'm not familiar with its location, but would it have been up near the border?
Yeah.
Near the Canadian border?
Canton, New York. It's not too far from the Canadian border.
Okay. In school, throughout your primary and secondary education, did you have favorite subjects?
Yes, I think probably science is my favorite subject. I like chemistry particularly.
Okay. Now, you mentioned, Fred, before, this is the part that I want to get back to your beginnings in Brentwood. You came to Brentwood in the 50s, you said?
55.
55. Why did you come to Brentwood from way upstate?
Well, I wasn't really way upstate. I was in New Jersey at the time.
Oh. How did you, explain that transition?
Well, I had quite a few different positions. I started out in Callicoon, which was really a very, very small school. And
that was your first job?
Yes, I was there 2 years, and then I went to Waverly.
Before you went to Waverly, had you been teaching for 2 years?
Yes.
And what were you teaching? Is that science?
Math and science.
Math and science.
That's all I've ever taught.
I see.
And I was in Waverly 7 years. Then I went to Phelps. That's up near Rochester. I was assistant principal there. And, of course, also taught science. And then I went from there to Newton, New Jersey. I was principal of the high school. And then I went from Newton, New Jersey to here.
Now, before you came to Brentwood, how many years had you already been in education total?
Let's see, 14.
14 years before coming to Brentwood. And how did you get the call or hear about or learn of the opening in Brentwood for a principal?
I don't honestly remember.
Okay, all right. But at that point, Brentwood was, this certainly you will remember, Brentwood was a community that was undergoing major changes as a formerly rural area, and it was becoming more suburban. People were moving out in large numbers, and they clearly needed to accommodate the growth. And as you said before, there were only 9 grades. It was only up to the 9th grade. There was no high school at that time. Is that right?
No, there was no high school. There was almost nothing here because the elementary was in the firehouse. And it was very, very small elementary. And of course, my children played in the road. We live on Brentwood Road, and they played in the road, and you'd hardly see a car there all day.
Jeez. And most of the people who did go past the 9th grade went to Bayshore, is that right?
They I think, past the 8th grade. I think starting with the 9th grade, they all went to Bayshore.
who was it, at any rate, that interviewed you when you came to Brentwood?
Board of Education
Uh-huh.
and Dr. Hoyt.
I see. And you wouldn't recall any aspect of that interview, would you, or anything stand out in your memory about that, about the conversations or the exchange that occurred?
Well, they were, the board made it very plain that they were interested in somebody with some experience in the secondary level to get the school started.
Yes. And Dr. Hoyt at that point was, Eugene Hoyt was very active in recruiting
Yes.
people for positions that were opening up.
Well, he was in Middlebury when I was there,
Mhm.
so I knew him before I came here.
Oh, I see. Okay. There obviously is was the source of information about Brentwood.
Yes.
What were some of the first impressions you had of this community when you arrived, of Brentwood and of the school district?
Well, it was somewhat discouraging because there was almost nothing done, and you had to start really from scratch to build up a school.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, some of it was good because you could build it the way you wanted to build it.
Mm-hmm.
I know one of the biggest problems that I had when I first came there in the high school was the dress. The kids came in old, ragged clothes and so forth. And the dress was really very bad, and I worked on that through the student council. Harold Windsor was president of the student council, and he was instrumental in getting the students to dress properly.
Sets a tone in the classroom.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. And it certainly also affects a student's image of themselves, a self-image. I can understand why that would have been very important. Of course, toward the latter part, I guess it was later in the 60s, students began, or while you were still in the high school, there was a change in the population, and there was a reaction to what students felt at some point down the road was an objection to the dress codes and authority. Exactly right, yes. And that was when the pendulum swung the other way.
That was true all over, of course.
Yes, it was.
The 60s are known as a period of adolescent rebellion.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Very, very difficult time.
Fred, have you ever, I know I've heard other people say this, but I wondered what your thoughts on it were. Did you ever see Brentwood as a sort of a microcosm of what was going on throughout this country? That what happened here very often happened here first, and then you would see it occurring elsewhere?
Yes, to a degree.
Yeah. We were also, in many ways, I guess we were like a mirror of the larger society. And so the thing that you mentioned just now about the objection to authority was in fact happening all over.
Yes.
Elsewhere.
Of course, the Vietnam War brought that on somewhat, I think. There was a period of unrest. A lot of the students, of course, that went to college went only because they wanted to avoid the draft.
Yes.
And of course, a lot of the others fled to Canada. Didn't want to go in the draft. There are thousands, that went to Canada.
That's right. Did we see that in Brentwood also? Did we see?
Not much. No, we didn't see much of that in Brentwood. Mm. So just a very small fraction.
I know, like every high school, we lost people in Vietnam. There was a memorial placed in front of the Ross Building for the first student from Brentwood High School to give his life in Vietnam.
We saw a lot of that from Stony Brook because A lot of the students, you see, came over from Stony Brook just to really start trouble.
Uh-huh. Stir things up.
Right.
Mm. Do you think that one of the criticisms very often leveled at education, schools of education or training programs is I used to hear this a lot, that they didn't prepare teachers for what they experienced. Did you think that your training and your experience prepared you for what you found when you got to this district and began to create a high school and to create a system that didn't exist?
No, I don't think even today, I don't think the colleges prepare the students adequately for teaching. I don't think that they are very realistic about it.
Realistic meaning honest about what you can expect when you get in there. Yes. Yeah. Let's go down that road just for a moment. What do you think should be taught or told to people entering the field of education?
Well, I think the whole thing should be laid out to them so that they know what they're getting into. Many of them, first year teachers, they're not able to cope with the situations that they find. Student teaching sometimes is very unrealistic.
Is it?
Very.
In what sense do you mean?
Well, to begin with, their own, many of the schools only send them out for a very short time, maybe 10 weeks. Mm. Or if they're longer than 10 weeks, they're not teaching maybe 1 or 2 classes at the most. And many of the schools, in fact, most of the schools want the cooperating teacher there all the time, full time. That's not a realistic experience, not at all.
Does that have anything to do with the law, or is that...
Indirectly it does, yeah. Yes. Law influences it, but they still could they could have the teacher outside the room, exactly. With the door closed, yes. And so on.
Yes.
Because the teacher doesn't have to be in the classroom, they have to be in the vicinity.
Okay. And, it makes a world of difference. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Didn't you find that somewhat true?
I absolutely found that to be true. And I suspect that if that is still the practice, then I would agree that's a major problem in preparation. What did you see? We're talking now about your principalship in high school. What did you see as your purpose? Within or outside your job description, what did you see as your purpose?
Well, the purpose really was to build a high school that would be able to function and still give all of the students the best education possible for what they were going to go into.
An awesome responsibility given the way this district was changing during those years.
Yes.
And growing. I can only imagine stress associated with, and also the satisfaction though, because you accomplished a wonderful product when all was said and done. Do you feel proud of what you saw afterward, or
yes?
Do you have any reservations? Did you have any regrets or things that you would like to have accomplished that you weren't able to?
Well, I think you always have that.
Sure. But that's why I asked the question, because I wondered what, in your case, you might point to say, I wish I could have done this, but I couldn't. It wasn't possible to do this, that, or the other.
Well, there are many things that was impossible to do, but we did get the school to be relatively well-disciplined And I hope that we prepare the students, many of them, for college and for other work that those that didn't go to college.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. That's the case. Do you now have occasion to run into or to be in touch with people who have been students?
Oh yes, many. Many times I do a lot of walking, and many times I'm downtown and somebody will stop me on the street and, do you know who I am? Well, obviously I don't, but when they tell me their name, I may remember them, I may not have. The early days, of course, the school was very small and I knew everybody.
Yes. Isn't that a wonderful quality to be able to enjoy when it is a small school and you can know every person? I think if there was one thing that we could do to change the quality of our public school system, it would be to limit the size of schools if it were possible to do that. But because size is such an enemy of the goals that we would attempt to achieve.
We had only 64 in the first graduating class. And of course, at that time I knew everybody.
Absolutely, sure. Now you're still, as I said prior to the interview, I can't even refer to you as being retired because you have been so active for so many years subsequent to your active service at the high school. So to say, do you have contact with former colleagues or connections with the active staff would be self-evident. Of course you do.
Yes.
You see people every day. You were, would you have been, Fred, you would have been the first principal of Brentwood High School.
That's correct.
At that time, there was no professional organization in the district, was there?
None whatever.
So policy was made pretty much by the board and dictated by the board.
Mm-hmm. Ed Sonderling was president of the board, of course, at that time, and he was a tremendous help because anything that I wanted to do, he would invariably, if it came down to, well, can we do this or can we do that, he'd say, well, what do you think? And he would take my recommendation for anything that.
So he was very supportive. What was he lived in the community? What was his other?
He was chairman of the waterworks.
I see.
Water district. That time, of course, the high school was in the where the administration building is now, and his office was right across the street. So if I had any particular problem, I could go over there, or he might come over to see me.
So at the time you're talking about, the high school was in the village school.
Right.
Yes. With a graduating class the first year of 67. Is that what you said? 67, 69?
64 or 66.
Okay, yes. Wow.
In that area.
At what point, Fred, did, if you can remember what point there began to be talk about forming some kind of organization or professional organization? Was it the teachers that first began?
Yes, the teachers were the ones that started. I'm trying to think of the fellow's name.
Marion Gray, was he in the beginning, or were there people prior to him?
No. Of course, he was always interested in unions and so forth, very much so. But the chairman of the science department, I can't think of his name.
All right.
He's moved on back to Delaware.
All right, you're thinking of Dave?
Dave Marks, yes. He was the one that really organized the first union.
Okay.
Wasn't called a union at that time, just called a teachers' organization.
And then the organization ultimately decided to affiliate with NYSUP.
And he was the one that was responsible primarily for that.
And I believe Jack Zuckerman was also involved.
Yes, Jack was very, very active, of course. That came a little later, though. That was after the union got really started.
Uh-huh. Okay, but you're saying Dave Martz was instrumental in organizing the Brentwood Teachers Association. And then how was it that BIPSO came along? Or the Brentwood principals and supervisors?
Well, a lot of them, you see, at that time, each principal was paid what the board wanted to pay.
Yes.
And some of them weren't getting very much, and others were getting more.
Uh-huh.
So they just decided that if they had an organization, of course, by that time the teachers had the organization, and they felt that if they organized, that they'd do better financially.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the beginning of it.
Okay. Were you ever? Did you ever serve as officer or in one of those? In certainly in BIPSO and in the.
No.
You weren't involved politically, as it were, with the organization.
No.
Okay.
I belong, but I wasn't.
Yes. Do you think has your opinion of these kinds of unions or organizations changed over the years, or do you still have the same view of union, let's say, that you did many years ago?
Well, I think probably my view is about the same. They're necessary, I think. I don't like to say they're a necessary evil, because they're not, but there are things that the principals now can't do that they might like to do because of the organizations. So in some ways, I think it ties the hands of the administrator, but in other words, it's good because they've got to survive too.
Yes, yes. Shifting gears here. Some of the most lovable characters you've had the pleasure of knowing in Brentwood, and I put that in quotes, lovable characters. You've known a lot of very individual people, some of them friends, some of them just associates that you worked with. Are there any, well, for example, I will throw out a name of one such person who I consider to be a lovable character in my memory, but you knew him better than I, and that was Reggie Paquette.
Yes, Reggie did a lot for the school. He did a tremendous amount. He was somewhat of the old school. He believed in quite rigid discipline, and his shop was always run that way. And he was always somebody that would support the administration. He never would run it down.
He literally ran a tight shop.
Yes.
Yeah, not just figuratively, but very literally.
I can remember one instance where one of the students brought in a cartridge pistol, a starter pistol.
Oh.
And we had, at that time, in the shop, we had a teacher who had a bad heart. And this student came in one day and leveled the pistol at him and pulled the trigger. Now, of course, that sounds, just like a regular shot. And it's a wonder to me that he didn't drop, maybe dead,
Oh, boy.
Of course, Reggie was very upset about that. I remember we had a hearing for the board, and the boy was dismissed from school. I won't mention his name because he's been in a lot of trouble since, and is now in jail.
Oh. Talk about microcosm. There's an example of guns in school that goes back many, many years. That must have happened in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beryl Knott. Beryl Knott worked with you in the front office and was one of the first people I knew when I came to the district.
She was a hard worker, and she did a lot of very good things. The only problem I think with her was that she didn't want to work in the summer, and of course she had to work in the summers. Yes. It was by the boards. She didn't want to work in the summer. She only wanted to work 10 months, and she also didn't really like handling the discipline. She was very good in the classroom. And that's maybe where, that's from her standpoint, that maybe is where she should have stayed.
Oh, there were so many.
She did well, don't misunderstand me, but she didn't enjoy what she was doing.
There was the chairperson of the English department back when I arrived in the beginning of the 60s.
Mrs. Cairns.
Mrs. Cairns, Fran Cairns.
Yeah.
She was also a very strong,
yes, very strong,
take charge person.
Very.
Well, it certainly is consistent with the purpose that you were trying to accomplish. That you had people like Reggie and Mrs. Cairns that were able to follow your lead.
Yeah, they all believed in discipline. They all believed that the students had to be told what to do, and they had to follow that pattern. And so it was a big help.
When did you announce your retirement? What year was it, Fred, that you decided?
1973.
And at that time, if you don't mind my asking, why did you decide that it was time?
Well, I don't know that I really decided it was time. Mr. DiPietro was the superintendent, and his ideas and mine ideas did not work, did not go together at all.
Okay. So it was a question of a forced choice at that point. That, you had little choice but to choose.
Right.
And then, as we were talking before, you chose ultimately not to retire at all, but just to redirect your energies and to once again become active in a new way, in another capacity. And what was that? What did you do right afterward?
Well, I worked for Dowling College part-time, and I also worked for Farmingdale part-time. And
the State University in Farmingdale?
Yes, the State University in Farmingdale. I taught math there. And then in Dowling, I started out teaching math and science, but I ended up having charge of the whole education department.
Is that right?
Yeah. I was working there really 7 days a week because I'd go in the morning and there'd be this and that to do. And one of the things that they depended on me to do was place the student teachers, actually get them jobs. And Dowling while I was there, had the highest rate in the state of placing student teachers in jobs. But it took lots and lots of time because it meant not only phone calls, but it meant visiting the schools. I was working there, well, I'd go in like 7 o'clock in the morning and maybe get home at 10 o'clock at night. And going in Saturdays, part of Sundays.
Oh, boy.
It got to the point where I just didn't feel I could do it anymore.
Yes.
So that's why I left Dowling. But
now you were there from mid-70s for?
I've forgotten just when I did leave, but I would not have left again if I'd had more help and less time to.
You're very passionate about what you do, though, aren't you? I hear that from what you're saying. You don't take halfway measures. If you're going to do it, you try to do it the best possible way you can do it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Did you place people in Brentwood at that time also?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Not very many, though. Most of the places, most of them I placed were in Suffolk County.
I see.
But some were in Nassau.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I had some contacts. Later, I went to Adelphi. That's after I left Dowling.
Oh, after you left Dowling, you went?
Dowling, I went to Adelphi. And I worked there with Don Smith, who at that time was president of the Board of Education in I guess it was Sayville. And he was a tremendous help. Because he's also connected, you see, with Adelphi. And again, I placed a lot of the student teachers from Adelphi, mostly in Nassau County, but some. And at that time, too, what I did when I was at Dowling, I had the people from Texas come up and interview students, because at that time Texas was paying the highest teacher salaries of any place in the nation.
Is that right?
You know, they paid very, very high salaries. And many of our graduates from Dowling went to Texas as full-time teachers.
Huh.
And they came up from both Austin and Dallas to interview them.
And both Dowling and Adelphi at one time or another, in the time period we're talking about here, were building national reputations for their teacher education programs.
Right.
So you were a part of history being made there as well then?
Right.
That's quite an accomplishment to be able to put on your resume, and I mean the resume in here, this resume. Fred, I forgot to ask you about one other aspect of your time while you were still active, and that is the years in which the Ford Foundation came out and tried to get something going. There were Vincent Presno and
well, Dr. Hoyt is the one that got the grant from the Ford Foundation, and he wanted Ray Sheely to administer that grant. But for some reason, either Ray wasn't capable of it or he didn't want to do it. I don't know what it was. So he had me brought in Joe Dion from Harbor Fields to do it. But it never really was as successful as Dr. Hoyt wanted it to be.
Yeah, and both those people that you've mentioned, Dr. Ray Sheely later went on to become a full-time professor at Hofstra University, from which he is now retired. And of course, I guess every viewer will recognize that Joseph Dion became the CEO and chairman of McGraw-Hill, and today is still active with that corporation.
Right.
But they all got their beginnings in Brentwood. You were, to go back again to your active years, you saw a lot of turnover. You alluded earlier to the fact that many people didn't last past their first year. They didn't have the what it took to sustain themselves through the first couple of years. But I seem to recall a lot of teachers coming to Brentwood, getting a few years' experience, and then leaving.
Yes, that's
so you
true.
had high rates of turnover.
Too high.
Right. In those years. an enormous responsibility to be in charge of all of these people when all these processes were going on. Is there anything that that as you look back at the time that you served up until the handwriting was on the wall in terms of this is the time for you to leave here? You look back, did you feel a sense of accomplishment with what your purpose was while here?
Some, and yet there are a lot of things that I would like to have done that I wasn't able to do.
Name one.
Well, I would like to have seen the faculty a lot closer than they were. I would like to have seen them share with each other, and there wasn't much of that, and they were pretty much, somebody lived way out here, and somebody lived way out here.
Yes.
There wasn't much sense of cohesion.
But you did, and I want to give credit where credit is due. You were responsible for creating and allowing certain traditions to evolve here at the high school that could certainly have accomplished that. One tradition that I remember very clearly and very lovingly is the annual picnic.
Yeah. Reggie Paquette always ran that.
Right, but it always had your support. It couldn't have occurred without your support and endorsement. And I noticed in Newsday last week a 2-page article on how large multi-million-dollar corporations are looking at annual picnics as a very important source of networking among their employees and building connections that cannot happen in the workplace. And how sad it is that for the staff here and in this district, or at least in the high school, that tradition, no matter how they've tried to revive it, has never been able to come back to what it was under your watch. Matt Fay, Reggie, a host of other people would
yeah, they all
chip in.
They all helped out, and it was became sort of a tradition. I thought it was too bad that when they dropped it, but once Reggie left, you see,
yes.
There was nobody really there that wanted to step in.
Yes, yes. Because of the amount of work involved.
Right, exactly. It's a tremendous amount of work.
Yes.
And,
Fred, do you remember your salary the first year that you began in education?
The first year that I started?
Yes, first year you started?
Let's see. I was getting $1,400.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a lot of money for those days. Most of the salaries were $1,000 to $1,100.
Now, $1,400 for what period of time?
For the whole year.
$1,400. I want people to understand what you're talking about. This is not a weekly salary.
No.
This is $1,400 for a whole year.
And I had all the science. This is a very small high school, Calhoun High School, but I had all the science, all the math to teach. And I coached 4 sports. I coached football, basketball, baseball, and track. And I had the baseball over here, the track over here, and I'd have to go from one to the other. And I had a championship team in basketball that first year, and in track and baseball.
I would imagine it might have been kind of hard for you to understand the kinds of objections that people had later on when they came into your office to complain about this, that, or the other. When you had yourself fielded these kinds of responsibilities for that kind of income, it sort of makes other things pale into insignificance when you juxtapose it to your own experience.
Can you imagine anybody working for that kind of money today?
Well, it's
of course, the whole thing has changed. The economy's changed.
We're talking about a different world today. It is. It's incomprehensible to think that within one lifetime, it has changed so rapidly, though. That's the thing. Well, we talked about what you've been doing up to the point where you went to Adelphi, and then you made the change to the State University in Farmingdale after you left the district here. Subsequent to being at the State University, what did you do? What happened then? How did you get to the high school again in the evening program and decide to do that?
Well, the reason one of the reasons was that I wanted something to do. I just didn't want to sit around all day, and so I went over and asked Charlotte if she had any need for somebody in the evening high school. And she mentioned this RCT program that she'd wanted to start, but she couldn't find anybody who really wanted to do it. Well, I didn't know anything about the RCT because when I was in the connected school, there wasn't any RCT.
It wasn't, right.
But I thought, well, I'll try it. And I had very, very good success with it. I only had one, since I've been there 2 years now, I only had one failure.
Wow.
Of the group that I've had.
Wow.
And I've had some very difficult students. I'm saying difficult in the fact that they had a lot of trouble with science or math or whatnot.
Yes.
And the bad thing about it is that you're teaching reading, writing, American history, global studies, science and math all in one room at the same time.
Oh boy.
Of course, you don't have very many students, but it still is hard to accomplish what you want to accomplish. But of course, you have 3 hours there. You have 3 full hours. And their attendance is usually good.
You're not a man to shirk responsibility, though, and once having taken that on, your success rate speaks to your commitment.
Well, the majority of them I've had in there have really wanted to get through. Yeah. I had a young lady who got through. She took this global studies and American history 7 times.
Oh.
Took the test 7 times and failed it every time.
Oh.
And this semester she did very, very well in it. She didn't just pass it, but she got a very high score in it.
Good feeling.
So it is a sense of accomplishment because the students that I get there are students who want to get through. They have difficulty.
Different motivational level than it would be in the day.
Yeah.
This is perhaps an absurd question to ask, and then again, I'll ask it anyway. Is there anything, if you had your life to live over again, that you would have chosen differently or done differently?
Oh, probably a lot of things.
Okay. I think that's probably true of most people. But is there one thing that you can share with us that you've had second thoughts about?
Not any one particular thing, I don't think.
Okay. You've read a lot of books in your life.
Yes.
Can you
I still read a lot of books.
And you're still a reader. Can you mention one book that had a profound effect upon you? I know there have been many, Fred. That goes without saying. But
I can't think of one.
The reason I asked that question is for our librarian has asked me to, inquire of people because she wants to augment the library here with books that students will latch onto. And who better to go to than people who have been readers all their lives. Who have been your heroes in your life? Is there one figure that you can mention to say was at one point a role model or a hero of yours?
Well, I think probably the first principal I had, Charlie Lewis, was a role model in some respects because he followed just about what I did in college, and he was an outstanding principal.
Speaking of of your active service while in the employ of the Brentwood Board of Education here in the day. What did you miss most about that when that had come to an end?
Oh, probably the routine.
Uh-huh. And is there something that you didn't miss?
Yes. The responsibilities.
Yes, yes. Okay. Is there an issue that faces us in this country today, Fred, that you can see as one of the most important issues that we have to wrestle with?
I don't know that it is any worse today than it has been, but it's probably not much better. One is the drug situation, and the second one is the lack of respect, I think, by many teenagers for authority and for really learning.
Yes. And so then we both agree that there are major changes ahead for public education in this country if we're to get things right. What changes do you see ahead for the children of this district?
That's a hard question to answer.
I don't even know if it's a fair question to ask you at this point.
I don't know that I could.
Yeah.
I don't know that
Okay.
I could really answer it.
All right, we're coming down the home stretch now. There's only a few more questions that I would like to ask you. Stan Yankowski followed in your rather large footsteps. He had rather large feet to fit in those footsteps because of the size of the man. I haven't talked to Stan, as you know.
No, I know you said he didn't. I had
Yes.
second thoughts about
Yes,
it.
yes. Since then, there have been other principles to follow. The nature of the job, I suppose, has changed too because of the mix of things.
Well, we were on double session for a good big part of the time that I was in there with the Brentwood schools because of the enrollment and lack
Now,
of facilities.
was it during the time that you were principal that we also had portables affixed to the high school here?
Yes.
And then there was a fire in those. I recall there was a fire and we lost them.
But mainly...
but there were 23,000 students in the district in those years.
Yeah.
There's morning, afternoon, overlap session,
Yeah.
and then the evening session. So you had session for...
Well, I didn't have the evening session
No.
as such at that time, but I did have the morning and afternoon session. And I didn't have very much help.
To accomplish what your objectives.
Well, you see, I was there the full day. I was there for the morning session and the afternoon session.
Boy, oh boy.
So I was there by 7 o'clock in the morning, and many times I wouldn't be through before 6 or 7 night. Because I had nobody to fill in.
Yes. So it was after that they began then to add administrators to assist in the front office with assistant principals, et cetera, et cetera. My goodness. Okay. As we reflect here in these last few moments on what has been certainly an impressive career and is continuing to be an active life and certainly an extensive interview, is there one question that you would now like to ask yourself and then answer that I haven't asked you?
No.
Okay. Is there anything I left out that should have been covered in this?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
I certainly tried to hit everything to cover everything that I thought would be of interest both to you and to the viewers. But you never know. There might be something left on the sideline that you...
I'm sure there is, but...
Yeah. Okay. Fred, this was turnaround. This was a turnabout. You interviewed me for my first position in Brentwood, and now I've had the privilege of interviewing you. And I must tell you that it has been an honor, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And I want to thank you for the time that you've given us.
Well, thank you.